Hey, how's it going, guys? In this tutorial series, I'll be covering how to use the Google Photos API in Python. The Photos API has three main resources. You can think each resource as a class for a specific purpose. And for each resource, I'll make an individual video for each of them. Basically, I'll guide you through every single step to the point where you can hit the ground running. And that's the whole purpose of this tutorial video. With that being said, let's get started with this Google Photos API tutorial. So first I want to go to the documentation. Actually, let me hide the favorite tabs. If you go to developers.google.com/photos, and that should take you to this page right here. So you can probably navigate on your own, but I want to go to the guides tab. Now on the left hand side, if you look at the overview sections, and you can see that this API covers REST APIs, Java, PHP. However, the documentation does not contain any information on how to integrate the Google Photos API with Python. However, since we know this API supports REST API code, and we can use that along with the Google Python library, and we can make the API to work in Python. So that's the first thing I want to cover. Just showing you that from the documentation, there's no information on how to use Python with Google Photos API. Next, I want to cover the quota. And let me see, quota. Okay, so if you go under using the library API, and if you go to limits and quotas, so under the general quota limits, so we can see that the quota limit for requests to the library API is 10,000 requests per project per day. And what that means is you can create like maybe multiple projects. So you can have 10 projects, 5 projects, it depends. And for each project, you can send up to 10,000 requests per day per project. So that means for personal use, if you want to send maybe 50,000 API codes, you can basically allocate those 5 projects and to make a total of up to 50,000 API codes. But if you are creating a web application, then for each app, you can only have up to 10,000 API codes per day. The second one I want to talk about is the upload quota. So for the media items resource, you can make a request to access media bytes up to 75,000 requests per project per day. And what that means is within your API code, you can upload multiple media items, and that actually counts as just one request. So if I'm making a single API code, but I'm uploading maybe 10 to 15 images, and that actually counts as just one request. Now, if your requirements exceed the quota limitation, with the Google Photos API, this is actually a partner program. So if you click on requesting additional quota, and if you are a business or commercial corporation or company, you can actually send a quota requesting form and to Google, and they will basically examine your application and to see whether or not if you qualify for the quota increase. The next item I want to talk about is the authorization. So let me go back to guides. And if I scroll down to using the library API and go to authorization. And under about authorization protocols, and if you read the description closely, when you use Google Photos API, you must use the OAuth 2.0 to authorize requests. That means you cannot use the Google API keys to access the API. And you can go to all other information on your own. The other thing I want to quickly go over is different scopes. If you don't know what a scope is kind of like a different level permission. So for example, here we have a read-only scope. So by providing this scope value, and your application will only request read-only access from a user. But if you need to alter the contents of a Google's photo account, then you want to use different scope, such as this one right here, photos library.append only scope, or you can use the photo library, which is basically the master scope which contains all other different layers. So this scope actually gives you basically all the permissions to do just about anything with a user's Google Photos account. Alright, now that's everything I want to cover in terms of the documentation. Next, I want to just basically talk about how this tutorial series layout is going to be. So if I go to reference, and like I mentioned before, the Google Photos APIs has three different resources: albums, media items, and share albums. The albums resource manages a user's photo albums, and media items manage users' Google Photos media items such as image or videos. And the shared albums resource manage how an album will get shared or unshared. So more than likely, I'll have 4 or 5 videos to cover everything. So from albums, media items, and the shared albums. In the first video, I want to show you how to enable the Google Photos API service, and as well as how to construct Google Photos service object. And with that being said, let's get started with this tutorial. First, we need to go to Google Cloud Platform. So if you go to console.cloud.google.com, oops. And that should take you to the dashboard. So here you want to choose a project that you want to use. And I already created a project called Google API Tutorials. If you don't know how to create a project, I'll link the link to the tutorial on how to create a project. Now I'm going to choose this project. And on the left hand side, you want to click on this navigation menu. And under the APIs and the services, so you want to go to library. Before you can use an API, you need to enable the API service. So for this service that I want to enable is the Photos Library API. And click on Photo Library API. And on your screen, it says enable. And just click on enable, and that will enable the Photos Library API. And for mine, since I already enabled the API service, now here just says manage. So if I click on manage, that's going to take me to the Photos Library API dashboard. And from this dashboard, you can see how many quotas you have used for that day, and matrix. And credential is if you have multiple users that's working on the same app, you can create different credential access for each user. And I'm actually going to delete my OAuth 2.0 client ID. So I'm going to delete that. And we're going to start everything from scratch. So let me delete that. Now I'm actually going back to the main dashboard. So just click on this navigation menu and go to home. And let me go back again and go to APIs and services. And under the option credentials, and click on that. Here I want to create a brand new credential. And I'm going to choose OAuth client ID. Depending on your application type, it can be a web application, Android app, Chrome app, iOS, or other. And since I intend to use this API for my desktop application, I'm going to choose other. Now give your application type a name. So I'm going to call this desktop app. It should be desktop app. Okay, and click on create. So here you should get your OAuth client ID information. So with client ID and client secret. And make sure that you don't share this information with anyone. I'm going to leave this window open for now. And the next step is I want to create a virtual environment. So this step is optional. I know a lot of people prefer to use a single environment for all the development, but for me, I like to have my application. I like to have my application have their own development environment. So that way, when I install libraries or different packages, I don't interfere with libraries with other application. So here I'm going to open my command prompt. Oops, I'm going to navigate to my H drive. And I'm going to navigate to my Python virtual environment parent folder, which is this one right here. To create a virtual environment, so you want to type Python -m. M stands for module, VNV, and that's the module name that we'll be using to create a virtual environment, and followed by the virtual environment name that you want to give. So I'm going to name my virtual environment Google Photos. Let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger. Okay. And enter. Now that creates a virtual environment folder under this Google Photos folder. So this is basically my virtual environment for Google Photos app. And everything I do in this environment will be isolated from everything else. And the next thing I need to do is I need to activate my environment. So it'll be Google Photos / scripts and / and activate. Now this environment is activated, so everything I do in the command prompt will only affect the Google Photos environment. Now we need to install the Google Client library. And here, let me go back to Google, and I'm going to search Sheets API Python. And your first result should be the Python quick start page to the Google Sheet API. And scroll down to the bottom, so you want to copy this pip statement. So just click on this copy icon. Now go back to your command prompt and just paste the statement and enter. So what just happened was that using this statement right here, we installed the Google API Python client library, as well as the google-auth-oauthlib library, and the last one is the google-auth-oauthlib library. All these three libraries are basically utility libraries that Google provide to simplify the REST API code process. Now I can close this page. And there's one more package that I want to install, which is the pandas library. So I'll do pip install pandas. So the reason why I installed the pandas library is because when I deal with JSON data, pandas, in my opinion, is probably the best tool to manipulate and navigate the JSON data set. At this point, we have enabled the Google Photos API library, as well as install a virtual environment for our application, along with install all the required Python libraries. Now we can close the command prompt and go to Python. So here, let me open my Python editor, and I'm using Visual Studio Code. Here I'm going to create a new Python script. I'm going to name this file init photo service.py. And here, let me just change the environment to Google Photos. Oh, and there's one more thing I forgot. So go back to the credentials page. And under your OAuth 2.0 client account, So we want to download basically the client information as a JSON file. That way I don't have to retype the client ID and the client secret to request access from a user. And let me navigate to my virtual environment. And name this file to something that you will recognize. So this is actually going to be your client secret file. And I like to name my client secret file along with the project name as well as the app name. My project name is going to be Google API Tutorials. And my project name is Photo Desktop App. And click on Save. Now let's go back. So I create a utility script to expedite the service object creation process, and I'll have the link to download the utility script in the description below. But here, let me just grab the utility script, and I name my utility script google.py. If we just quickly go to the google.py, from this script we have two functions. The first function is the create service function. This is the function I use to construct different API service object. For different Google API service, you will have to individually create a service object based on the service that you'll be using. And the other function is convert just the datetime object to RFC format. And won't be using this function at all. Now let me close the google.py script, and we're going to create a Python script to construct the Google Photos service instance. The first library I import is the OS library, and from the Google module, I'm going to import the create service function. And pandas. Next, I'm going to create a couple variables to store the API name, API version, client secret file, as well as the scopes. For the API name will be photos library. Currently, we're using the V1 version, and I'm hoping for V2, Google will address some of the issues. So, which I'll be covering those issues in a second. And this is going to be your client secret file. So my file name is this one right here. And do I want to install? And I'll say yes. And let me close the terminal real quick. And for the scopes, let me go back to the documentation. So from authorization, and I want to have the master access. So I'm going to use the photo library scope. And as well as to be able to share your albums, you need to include the photos library sharing scope. From the photo library scope, it doesn't include the sharing access. So let me copy that and I'll include that to my scope variable. Now we have all the variables we need, so we can create our service instance. From the create service function, our first parameter is the client secret file, API name, API version, and the scopes. Now if I highlight my Python statements and just run it, and my program is going to ask me which account do I want to give permission to the app. And I'm going to choose my secondary account. And most likely this is going to be the page that you're going to see. And what that means is, so if your app is going to be used for commercial purpose, then this app needs to be verified. But since I'm using the API just for my own purpose, so I'm going to expand this advanced option and click on go to your app name and just click on that and click on that. Now it's going to get a different screen to ask you to grant the permission. So I'm going to just click on allow for all of them. And once you grant permission to basically all the scope assets, and it's going to get this message: the authentication flow has complete. You may close this window. And close this window. Now let's go back to the virtual environment folder. So what just happened is that using the create service function, we create a token file. And this token file contains the permission granting information. Every time when you want to use the Google Photos API service, and because from the google.py script, it's going to actually going to look for the token file to see if the access is already available. And if the access is already available, then it's going to use the token file and to basically to embed the permission. So I don't have to go to the permission granting steps again. Now let me just close. Let me just terminate this session. If I press F5 to run the Python script, and basically the whole script, and here you can see that we get this message: photo library service created successfully. While going to the permission granting steps. In some case, if you need to change the permission scopes, this can be maybe you need to regenerate a new token file to request different permission, or maybe you need to access a different account. And what you want to do is you can just delete the token file. And so let me just delete the token file, and that will basically start everything from fresh. So here, if I want to use a different account, which is my main account, then I can just click on my main account. And again, I'm going to use my secondary account, so I'm going to choose my secondary account. And we'll need to go to the same process again, which is granting permission to all the scopes. Now if I if I use the dir function to print all the attributes or methods from the service object, so let me move this to the top, and we can see that now from this service object, we have the albums, resource or class, media items, new batch, HTTP request, and this one is, I think this one is a utility function, and the share albums resource. So that's everything I'm going to cover in this lesson. For the next video, I'll be covering the album resource, and we'll be learning things like how to create a brand new album, list all the albums, how to share and unshare an album with a third party.